Hey y'all, and welcome back to another new video. We are continuing on with our series on the Marauders today. If you haven't seen the first segment in this series on the life of James Potter, definitely go check it out. And because this week we are going to be doing the life of Peter Pettigrew and the role he played in the series. Before we jump in, just make sure you give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy it. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel, hit the bell notification button, check out my link tree that'll be linked down below for all the other places you can find me. And without further ado, we can jump right into the video. So like I said, we are talking about Peter Pettigrew today. Peter was born in 1960. We don't know his exact birthday, and we actually know very little about his childhood and his family life, and we don't really know much about him until when he starts Hogwarts. So he starts Hogwarts in 1971. He is sorted into Gryffindor, and he becomes friends with the other three, James, Sirius, and Remus. And he only bullied Snape when the other three were present. He was probably way too scared of Snape to ever bully him on his own without the protection of the other three. He was kind of always the like meekest of the group, I would say. And so he became an anime guy also when he found out that Remus was a werewolf and his anime guy was a rat. And he would slip through the Whomping Willow's branches to immobilize the tree. That was kind of his role in the whole charade. And he earned the nickname Wormtail. And we know that they called themselves the Marauders and made the map at some point, and he played a role in that. And yeah, it definitely seemed like he was sort of the least important member of their group. Speaking about him from memory, McGonagall, we hear her say that she thought he was stupid, foolish, a wannabe, and a below average student. So very harsh criticism. But yeah, so after graduation, he also joins the Order of the Phoenix. And eventually, though, he comes to believe that nothing good can come from opposing Voldemort. He believes that Voldemort is bound to win, and they're all just going to end up killed if they keep opposing him. And so he becomes a double agent and is spying on the Order. And basically, the perfect opportunity falls right into his lap when Sirius suggests that he actually becomes the secret keeper for the Potters, and he betrayed them just a week later. Pettigrew arrives at the wreckage of Godric's Hollow after everything that had happened, and he basically figured out that Voldemort had been destroyed. So he takes Voldemort's wand with him and is going to run away and go into hiding because he knows now that the Order is going to know that he betrayed them because he thinks Sirius is going to tell everyone he was the actual secret keeper. And he also thinks that the Death Eaters might think he betrayed them as well because the information Peter gave them led to Voldemort's destruction. So he's really feels like there's no place safe for him, so he's going to go into hiding. And on his way out, Sirius tracks him down and confronts him. But Peter outwits him and uses a blasting curse to basically fake his own death, as well as kill 12 muggles. He cuts off his finger, basically makes it look like Sirius did all of this, which worked, and then he runs away. And, you know, quote unquote, posthumously, he was given Order of Merlin First Class, which is a very big honor that he did not deserve. So he goes into hiding as a rat at the Weasleys. And basically, he's afraid that the Death Eaters are going to suspect him as a traitor, which I already mentioned. So yeah, so he's in hiding with the Weasleys. And this was a really good situation because it allowed him to stay up to date on current Wizarding World events. And when Ron befriended Harry, this was even more perfect because Peter kind of believed that Voldemort was going to return. And so he thinks, because like some of the Death Eaters thought Voldemort was gone for good, some of them thought he would return. Peter was in that second group. And he sees Harry as like the perfect welcome back gift, that he's going to basically be able to kidnap Harry, give him as a welcome back gift to Voldemort to prove his loyalty. And yeah, so basically, yeah, to prove he wasn't a traitor. And in 1993, in Azkaban, Sirius sees a picture of Peter Pettigrew in rat form on the cover of a newspaper on the Daily Prophet. This is that picture of them in Egypt from when the Weasleys went there on a trip. And so Sirius escapes. I'll talk more about how in Sirius's edition of this series to try and find Peter. And when Peter finds out that Sirius Black is on the loose, he pretty much realizes what's going to happen. So he goes into hiding in rat form again in Hagrid's. He basically fakes his own death again. And he's hiding in Hagrid's hut, but, you know, Ron believes that Hermione's cat Crookshanks ate him, and it kind of drives a rift into their friendship. And all this time, Remus thought that Peter was dead, thought that Sirius had betrayed them, until he sees Peter's name on the Marauders map, and then he kind of starts to put the pieces together and wonder if maybe he was wrong. And so on June 6th, 1994, Ron finds Scabbers in Hagrid's hut, and you know, Scabbers, Peter, in rat form. And Ron and Scabbers are dragged into the Shrieking Shack by Sirius in dog form. And in this scene that follows, his true identity is unmasked by Remus and Sirius. And they plan to kill him, but Harry actually intervenes and stops them. Harry wanted to hand him over to the Death Eaters, so that they could use him to clear Sirius's name. And this created a life debt between Peter and Harry. But unfortunately, their plan fell apart because a full moon happened, and in all the excitement, Lupin had forgotten to take his wolfsbane potion that Snape had been making him, and so he did transform into a werewolf. And yeah, so Peter used all the confusion to transform into a rat and run off. And this is where I think the story of Peter's life is actually pretty interesting. And so he had taken Voldemort's wand with him, along with him all this time. So he goes and gets it, and he runs off to Albania. And he knew to go here because the rats had told him, I guess like in rat form he could communicate with other rats. The rats had told him of a dark shadow that would take over animals and kill them. And he basically thinks that this might be Voldemort. So on the way, he ran into Bertha Jorkins, a ministry official who was on vacation in Albania, and she recognized him, so he had no choice but to like kidnap her basically, because she thinks he's supposed to be dead. So basically he takes her to Voldemort, and Voldemort in his like shadowy form and Peter, so I'm sure Peter did most of this, they torture her until she gives up very important information. So she tells them about the upcoming Triwizard Tournament and the locations of some still faithful Death Eaters, including Barty Crouch Jr. And so they used a memory charm on her, meant to make her forget that this ever happened, but it kind of like went wrong, and she ended up suffering permanent brain damage from it. And so Voldemort just like was over it, and so decided that they should kill her, and so they did. And Peter actually thought this was a mistake because her disappearance was going to be noticed and people were going to wonder what had happened. He thought they should have just wiped her memory and sent her on her way, but that's obviously not what happened. And Peter would milk Nagini to strengthen Voldemort to give him sort of a rudimentary body, that like baby body. And there are theories about the baby body. I've done a video on TikTok, it went recently viral, so maybe you've seen it, about the theory about how we got the baby body and how that kind of corresponds with Bertha, but I'm gonna leave it out of this video just because it's kind of dark, so you can go find that on TikTok if you want to hear it. Once again, just a theory, it's unconfirmed. And so Peter carried Voldemort's small little baby body all the way back to Britain, where they took up residence in Tom Riddle's old house outside of Little Hangleton. I might be pronouncing that town wrong. And Voldemort, interestingly, calls Peter by his marauder named Wormtail. I'm not really sure why. Maybe it's sort of just like him being kind of mocking of him. And lucky for Peter, since he's supposed to be dead, Voldemort never possesses his body like he did Quirrell's, because like obviously he can't go out into the world in Peter's body because Peter's supposed to be dead. And Peter tried to convince Voldemort to use somebody besides Harry to rebuild his body. I'm not really sure why, but Voldemort did refuse. And so once he refused, Peter was like, okay, well, I'll go capture Harry. But Voldemort didn't trust Peter. He thought he was going to desert him and accused him of regretting ever rejoining him. And Voldemort really needed Peter, really, in order to survive and to continue building back his strength. So he was actually probably really afraid that Peter was going to leave him. And Wormtail was obviously very scared of Voldemort. And we see this at different times, like for example, multiple times, like Peter would like flinch when Voldemort would touch him and stuff. So he was very, very afraid of him. And while at this Riddle house, they did kill the Muggle caretaker Frank Bryce. And Peter took Voldemort to the Crouch family home after this to free Barty Crouch Jr. And Peter and Barty Crouch Jr. went to capture Alastor Moody because he was supposed to be teaching at Hogwarts the next year. And so while Barty Crouch Jr. was impersonating Mad-Eye Moody, Peter's job was to be keeping Barty Crouch Sr. under the Imperious Curse, to be acting under their will, but he did neglect his duties and Barty Crouch Sr. almost escaped. But Jr. intercepted him and killed him, and Peter was punished for this by being tortured with the Cruciatus Curse. And so continuing on with that year, Peter did play a very important role in Voldemort's rebirth. So when Harry arrived in the Little Hangleton graveyard with Cedric, Peter killed Cedric with Voldemort's wand and then went on to perform the ritual, which involved cutting Harry's arm and using some of his blood, as well as sacrificing his own hand. And he also rolled Voldemort when he emerged reborn from the cauldron. Peter was given a silver hand for his good work. And it can be assumed that this event, where he was seen by many of the Death Eaters when they joined him, as well as Sirius Blackslater's death by a Death Eater, made it obvious to the public that he was alive and actually a Death Eater, and Sirius had been innocent. So now he doesn't really have to be in as much hiding, only hiding now because he's a Death Eater. But it's never clearly said, but I think it's pretty assumed that now people know that Peter actually is alive. And so after this, Voldemort sends Peter to Spinner's End, which is Snape's childhood home, to assist Snape. And Snape basically treats Peter like a servant, which I'm sure was so fun for Snape to like treat his like one of his childhood bullies, which like granted Peter probably wasn't as much of a bully to him as other people were, but to have one of his childhood bullies like do all his dirty work which, like, I'm not saying that Snape is, like, perfect, but that's kind of, like, funny in my opinion, and Peter deserved it. And Peter was definitely too scared to resist any of this, so he just, like, went along with it. And he was at the house when Snape and Narcissa made the unbreakable vow, but he didn't hear it because Snape sent him away so he couldn't eavesdrop, which apparently he'd been caught multiple times eavesdropping. And in the summer of 1997, Peter was living at Malfoy Manor with the rest of, like, the inner circle and the Death Eaters. And his job was basically to be the jail keeper for the people kept in the dungeons, which I'm sure was not, like, a ideal job. Like, despite Peter's, like, constant, like, loyalty to Voldemort, he was always just, like, the bottom of the barrel for them. And while Ollivander was kept prisoner, Ollivander was forced to make Peter a new wand. And Peter was also present when Charity Burbage, the Muggle study professor at Hogwarts, who had been imprisoned in Malfoy Manor, was killed and fed to Nagini, so he did witness that event as well. And when the trio, Dean and Griphook, were brought to Malfoy Manor by a Snatcher, Peter was there as well, and he was, like, the Death Eaters heard a noise from above, and that noise was Dobby apparating away, like a little popping sound, and so he was sent down to investigate. When he got down there, Ron and Harry tackled him, and Ron took his wand, and Peter actually started to strangle Harry, but Harry reminded him he owed him a life debt. This is left out of the movie. And so Peter hesitates, and because of this hesitation, his silver hand turns on him and basically strangles and kills him for his disloyalty to Voldemort. And Ron and Harry did actually try to restrain it. They did try to save him, which is interesting. And it's unknown exactly what happened to his corpse afterwards. I'm assuming, who knows what they did to it. They probably fed him to Nagini. But the Sorting Hat actually did believe that Peter belonged in Gryffindor, despite much debate, and actually views his death as proof of this. They said that it did show that deep down he was brave and willing to stand up for what he believes in. I'm not, like, 100% sure. I'm sure people have very different opinions about that. So yeah, that's basically his life, and I don't really know why they chose to leave his death out of the movie, because I think it would have been a very compelling scene to show just how little Voldemort actually cared about any of his followers. I mean, he didn't care about them, only what they could do for him. I mean, the minute Peter showed the slightest bit of disloyalty, he was dead. So I wish they'd included it in the movie, but they didn't. And that's pretty much the end of his life. He's probably one of my least favorite characters, but kind of diving in and viewing his whole story kind of chronologically was interesting to me. I found it very interesting. I mean, I definitely still hate him, but I don't know. This was just kind of fun for me. I feel like he's one of the characters less talked about. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video as well. The next character study we are looking at is Sirius Black. So come back in a few days to see that video. And so until next time, bye y'all.